Alrighty, we'll get started here in about a minute, 30 seconds, whenever everybody gets in and sits down, so no rush. Thank you all for coming. Alrighty, I think that's enough time for everyone. Can everybody hear me? All right, good, perfect. I won't walk away from the mic this time. I'm all mic'd up. So thank you everybody for joining us today on this lovely cloudy day. We might be getting some rain to go into the pond soon. So my name is Katie. I'm the Cultivate coordinator here. I am in the wellness team, and I teach classes on plants, landscaping, and help the garden angels as well as the gardening committee. So if you don't know me, now you do. I want to say hi to everybody who is in here who helped with this project. This was a kind of a collaborative effort of me learning about Cedar Field's history and about the pond. I am newer here. I just started in last October. But through the help of Frank Miller and the Environmental Committee, as well as James Hicks, the Maintenance and Engineering Director, we gathered up all of the information to come up with what has happened in the past, what we need to do, what potential things we're going to be doing in the future, and then some innovative ideas that I'd love to hear your input on. So also wanted to thank Jan Steele for helping me with the plants for the birds and everything like that. So it's a collaborative effort, and that's kind of what I want you all to think about while you're thinking about the pond. This is a space that's a very functional space. It's not always very pretty, but it is a space where we can all work together to get some real enjoyment out of it, especially when it's nice and pretty. So Solitude Pond Management was who designed the pond originally, but all of the maintenance and everything is now coordinated through Cedar Field. So just so you're aware. The purpose of my talk today is just, like I said, to briefly go over the history of the pond and a little bit of stormwater management history. I'm kind of a dork about that, so I'm a trained Chesapeake Bay landscaper. So what they do is teach landscapers how to choose plants and do landscaping techniques that are healthy for the watershed. And the watershed is wherever you are, you're in a watershed. We are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, so that means all of our tributaries, the water that runs off our roof, every bit of it ends up out in the Chesapeake Bay. So at the end of the day, we're trying to use these stormwater management techniques to protect the bay. So we'll talk a little bit about why we need to do that. I know we're all here because we think the pond is beautiful and perfect, right? No, we're going to talk about some of those current concerns and outline what we can do about them, and all of the plans we have to address any other issues. And then we'll discuss those future opportunities for enhancement and enjoyment. So, like I said, the pond is not just for good looks. It serves a greater function to preserve the health and safety of our community and our waterways. I'm going to show you a short video that does a much more entertaining job of talking about it than I could do. So it's just going to be a short 5-minute video talking about stormwater management and why it's cool. Oh no. Do we have sound? Thank you. That's my apologies. I forgot that I wanted to play y'all a little video. So and this video is done by an organization in Alabama. So even though it's not from Virginia, it's still very applicable to us. Alabama also has a lot of watershed issues coming down through the Mobile Bay. They deal with the same problems that we have, capturing sediment, capturing runoff from development. This area used to be a lot of farmland, and now it's not, as we know. So part of this is due to human activity. We need to do techniques like this. All right. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a great idea. the volume's a little low. Hold on 1 second. I think oh geez. There we go. That'll help. Perfect. Thanks.
Oh, what makes it dirty?
Can everybody hear that?
70% of the Earth's surface is covered.
Yeah, we're trying to get it hooked up. We're doing a using the wireless to project this, so it is a little technical difficulties.
Check.
Perfect.
By water, but only 3% of it is not salty, and the majority of this fresh water is frozen in glaciers. Only a tiny portion of the world's water is usable for sustaining our quality of life. That is why we need to protect it.
Okay. Doo. Okay. Let's see. For the audio.
This third thing from the right is it on?
Let's try this one.
Salty, and the majority of this fresh water is frozen in glaciers. Only a tiny portion of the world's water is usable for sustaining our quality of life. That is why we need to protect it. Understanding how fresh water cycles on the Earth helps us find the source and causes of pollution. Energy from the sun heats the surface of exposed water, evaporating it into its gas form. As water vapor cools, it condenses, resulting in rain and snow. In natural areas, the majority of this water is evaporated back into the air or absorbed into the ground. The rest runs downhill through the watershed in creeks that empty into lakes and rivers, then bays and seas, which are part of our watersheds. A watershed is an area of land that drains into the same body of water. It can be a small area, like land surrounding a single creek, or it can include an entire river system that crosses state lines. It's important to remember that wherever you are in a watershed, and however that land is used within the watershed will affect the water quality downstream. Improper agricultural uses lead to increased sediment, fertilizer, pesticide, and pathogen pollutions. Residential use increases the amount of trash, fertilizers, pesticides, and pathogens. Commercial areas lead to additional trash, oil, and grease in the water, and industrial areas lead to more pollution of chemicals and trash. Regardless, all types of pollution can come from any of these land uses. Surfaces such as roofs, roads, parking lots, and even manicured lawns prevent rain from absorbing into the ground. When areas develop, more rainwater is converted to stormwater runoff, carrying with it a variety of pollutants. The Environmental Protection Agency classifies these as non-point source pollution because they don't originate at a single source, like a pipe coming out of a factory or a wastewater treatment plant. These point sources are heavily regulated through permitting.
So that's just a little bit about the things that come off of the road and end up in our water, and that leads us to why we have the pond in the first place. Cedarfield has been developed for a long time. So before we were Cedarfield, we were the United Methodist Homes. Before that, it was a farm. So this area, or actually the railroad came through here and then before that. So this area has been developed and depleted of resources for a long time. So the pond helps prevent those pollutions and everything from running into Deep Run Park and then again into the watershed. So thank you for bearing with me for that video. So what we have, the pond is technically called a best management practice, or a BMP. This is a functional area. It is not the same as a natural pond. It is a constructed environment that needs to be maintained. The types of stormwater management BMPs that we have evolved a lot over time. So we're going to travel back in time a little bit, back to the 1800s, back when the railroads were running through here and this area was largely farmland. What we did with our water then, including our sewage water, was everything goes in the ditch and goes to the stream and goes on down, and we don't care about it anymore. So that was the basic level of management, and that doesn't really work. You end up with a lot of illness downstream, especially in the early 1900s as we started to use more pipes to more quickly push that water around. Illnesses, especially in livestock and in people, really increased along the river. The 40s through the 70s, stormwater approaches were refined, but we're causing a lot of flooding still, so we're trying to capture that water and hold it. Now, as time has gone on into the 80s and 90s, we've started to think about the ecology of spaces, what that water is actually doing to the birds and plants and soil and ourselves over time. That's when we start thinking about watersheds, and you might have started to hear a lot more of save the watershed at that time. It's difficult to connect to a watershed personally. So nowadays, we try to get homeowners, property owners, and people who live at places like this to think about small-scale things that they can do that will help overall create a unified system that works in little ways and very big ways. And so that's what the pond is. So management is part of being a good neighbor and having a good neighbor. This is all, if you really think about it, we want our upstream neighbors to do the same things that we're doing right now, and therefore we want to do that to be good neighbors to our downstream neighbors, including conservation areas like Deep Run Park and eventually the Bay. So our solution is to, oh, that was my little example. So here's everything running into a ditch. Here's all the pipes moving everything around real fast. Doesn't that look delicious? There's all the flooding that can happen, and we've had a lot of talk of flooding lately, especially with the much larger storms. Well, this has been a problem as we've developed America, especially for those in low-lying areas. The lovely recognition that chemicals in the water are not a good thing. You know, we've all seen oil slicks and spills and discolored water. I mean, if it's polluted enough, it'll catch on fire. So really trying to manage that is very important. And then thinking about things from the watershed perspective, the ecosystem as a whole, and then getting back to the basics of what we can do at our sites, in our little neighborhoods, and how we can include the natural world in that. So our solution is to have a wet retention pond. So this is different than a detention pond or a dry pond. Detention ponds and dry ponds are not meant to hold on to the water for a long time. Our wet retention pond is meant to keep that water there. So there's always going to be some kind of water in it, which is great because it's a beautiful thing to have, a nice body of water nearby. What that doesn't mean is that there's an outlet somewhere. So if the water sits there, it's not connected back into a natural system. It does not go into a stream unless it overflows entirely. That's why the sides of the pond are so high. So we have that dam at the back where there's that seating area with the deck. That area is to prevent the pond from overflowing and dumping all of those pollutants out at one time. If you don't control that, you end up with all of your retention ponds in an area flooding at once and causing large-scale flooding down the stream. So this wet retention pond was revised in 2019 and dug out. I was not here then, but some of you were, so you remember seeing it. I saw some great pictures earlier of that, so it's very cool to have. The system functions well. It's not necessarily the most modern solution. There are many other things that are done nowadays that are much larger scale projects involving underwater or underground basins and different things like that. But this is a very practical, effective way to manage our water and keep those pollutants from escaping. So there's actually a total of 4.5 acres around the pond that is considered to be the pond area. That includes all of our trails. The pond itself is about 1.2 acres large. So it's a good sized pond. It's not huge, but it's definitely good. I would imagine you all would think it's deeper than it is. The deepest point is 8 feet. That's it. And most of it's much more shallow than that. So sediment builds up over time and can raise that level, and so can things like tree debris. And I don't know if you remember earlier this year, we had all the downed trees from our lovely buddy, the beaver. That will raise the water level as well, and so cleaning that out is part of the management. there currently are 4 ways for water to get into this pond. There's one drain that leads from the front of the road, from closer to Tuckahoe, or to the road out there that I can't remember the name right now. Thank you, Three Chopped. The things you forget. So one comes from Three Chopped, one comes from the court, and one comes from the lane right by the tennis courts, and the other is rain, because of course it's coming off of the sky, it's sheet running off of the roads, things like that. So it doesn't always go through a drain, it doesn't always go through the system process, but the pond catches it eventually because it's the lowest lying spot at Cedarfield. Well, relatively speaking, for a large area. So that of that 1.2 acres, there is smaller portions of it that are selected to do different things. So it's not constructed completely flat. It's also not really suitable for swimming in it because it's meant to catch pollution. So you can fish in it, you can boat on top of it, but not submerging yourself and swimming in it. So unfortunately, we won't have the Olympics swimming out there. So this is what the pond looks like from a design perspective. This is us looking down at the top of it. So the side that says the forebay there on the far side, I don't know if you can, it's not really visible, but the forebay is the area closest to the Cedarfield Parkway. It's what we see when we first come in. Right now it's covered in weeds, plants that we don't want. That's just what weeds are. So it's usually that big mucky area that's really close to the road. So that has a thing that divides it from the rest of the pond. It's actually a large riprap, a bunch of rocks all stacked together that keeps the water separate, because you want your water to stop. When we're doing stormwater management, we want to slow the water down, we want to make it move back and forth, and we want to keep it where it is as long as we can to allow all of those particles to filter out and sink and sit down at the bottom. Also, you can see the light green around it is the vegetated shelf. That's where all of the plants are growing. They could be different levels of submerging in the water, so all the way from upland plants that are dry most of the time to being fully submerged. So that's something that we want to consider in the future. And then the outlet structure at the other side, that is the area by the deck and on closest to Deep Run Park. So that is the structure of the pond, generally speaking. It is like I said, a man-made environment, so it does need to be maintained to keep these features. So our top biggest concerns right now are going to be that sediment buildup. So the reason that we have weeds there is because there's now soil there. Even if it is contaminated, some plants can grow in there, especially weeds. Weeds are known for being very, very tough. They don't really care what's going on. They're going to grow. So that area is not suitable for a lot of plants because of the level of pollutants in it. Now, the other problem is the pond scum, the green algae growth that sits on top of it. That's something that we've all seen with ponds. It's a pretty normal part of pond life, but it's a little bit icky looking right now. So the other thing is the untidy vegetation along the sides. We don't really have good viewpoints. There's not a lot of clarity in the layers of the design, and it's not very pretty. We want flowers. We want to see birds and butterflies and get those visual benefits from the pond and not just the functional benefits. So what have we done so far? Just a quick recap so that you know that things are moving ahead even if you don't necessarily see it. We got our buddy the beaver out of there. This is a wetland area. No, we got another one? Possibly. Oh, okay. Well, we've got some slapping back. That's probably a good sign. But as I was going to say, if you don't have a beaver, you will have a beaver. They just keep coming back. They're kind of nature's editors. They change systems. They take down trees. They don't often kill trees if they're the native species. The trees will re-sprout from those little stumps. But sometimes they'll take down the pretty ornamental trees like the crepe myrtles, and we don't like that. So the beaver problem is being managed and addressed, and hopefully not back yet. This is a plant called spatterdock. These are the lily pads that you see all over the pond. It is a native species, but it is a very vigorous grower, and one of the things it does is uses up a lot of the oxygen in the water, and it can actually create dead zones underneath of the plants where there is no oxygen available to the fish. So it looks like a lush and friendly habitat, but it is not actually. It really is a tough challenge to keep your oxygen levels balanced in a retention pond due to a bunch of different chemical interactions. But the spatterdock management is important to make sure that we're not having lack of oxygen. And that little yellow dot, if you can see it, it's a very unattractive flower. So that's what they do. But they do serve a purpose in the ecosystem for supporting our wildlife. We've also removed a lot of debris already this year, so downed branches, trees that have fallen, stuff that washes in there, trash, that has all been removed as well. So our goals to improve the pond are to get that forebay dredged. Dredging is the mechanical removal of soil, sediment, something from the ground, and physically taking it away. It's going to be something that will be done with large machinery. Getting the algae in balance, so reducing that pond scum without reducing the habitat and visual quality of the space, and doing landscaping improvements, so utilizing attractive and functional plant species for beautification. So those are the most important things that we're going to be approaching as our plan develops. There are many things that we could do that over time we have found are not helpful and actually can cause more issues. I know everybody's familiar with the Mr. Yuck sticker. So these solutions are things that have been tried but are not really applicable and can actually cause damage. So spraying is one, especially vegetation management, even with invasive species near water. It's very difficult to keep the spray where you put it. It just runs off into the water and it can kill other species, including wildlife and fish, insects, things like that. So spray tends to be difficult to use correctly. Fully dredging the pond, sometimes if you don't have that forebay, sometimes when you construct it, if you did not include that, you're going to have to take up the entire pond. So that is basically saying we're starting completely over. We've lost the benefits of that carbon capture, that nitrogen capture, that pollution capture. We've released a lot of those pollutants back into the air. And we've got to start completely over in any of our plants, any of our fish, anything that we've been enjoying about the pond, we would lose entirely. So having that forebay just to get rid of just that, it's about a fourth of the size of the pond. So just having that forebay to remove saves us from completely starting over. The other thing that sometimes people do is do what's called stocking fish. There's a type of carp that was used for a triploid carp, and they tend to eat everything. They leave nothing behind. They are kind of like a nuclear bomb of a fish. They change the content of the nitrogen in the water from so much waste as well, and they're not typically a very helpful or tasty species. So when we do stock the pond, if we do in the future, we would want to use indigenous species that would give us some kind of benefit and wouldn't just become a pond of only carp. The other option would be other chemical opportunities like bleach or things like that, where you could just pour stuff in the water. Again, that's just another start everything all over again process, and really you create your own problems when you go that kind of route. So the solutions that we've chosen to do are those that are not going to cause additional issues down the line and will preserve what we're doing. So that forebay dredging, this is a top-down image of what it looks like when you're dredging. I don't think he's actually dredging, he's doing something else. But this is kind of to give you an indication of the type of movement that we're doing. It's a lot of material. It's approximately 250 cubic yards, which is really hard to conceptualize. So I did a little math. It's equivalent to 327 tons, which is about the size of a 747 plane. So that's currently what is in our forebay, and that is about 60% full. It's actually functioning perfectly. Every 5 to 10 years, you're going to need to do something like this. You'll need to physically remove that sediment out of there to create space for more sediment to come in. The nice thing about having that forebay area is, like I said, we're not dredging the whole pond. So they'll drain just that specific area and keep the rest of the pond functional, and it'll keep working while we do this dredging, and then it'll get back to being even more functional. So what they're going to be digging out is all of that area near the parkway that's covered in weeds right now. All of that will go down, and it will just expose the sloped vegetative shelf around the pond that we will be planting. So, yeah. The next problem we have is balancing that algae. So in ponds, there are 3 kinds of algae, typically speaking. It's not to do with the color of them, but their place in the ecosystem. So macroalgae, you can kind of think of it as your seaweed. They look like actual leaves. Sometimes the plants will be planted terrestrially. They tend to have a big surface area space and float through the water. The filamentous, ooh, that's not how you say that. The filamentous type of algae is the stringy pond scum you see on the top of things. The long, looks almost like hair. And then planktonic is actually the most prevalent type of algae in any system. Those are the little tiny microscopic organisms that are very, very tiny and form the base of the food chain. They're very, very important because of that, but they can be a big problem, and they're actually what causes an issue when they're out of balance. They get out of balance through the actual functioning of the BMP. So the introduction of a lot of nitrogen, which is usually runoff from fertilizers or from pet waste, especially agricultural waste, high nitrogen. And nitrogen is what makes plants grow. That's the main chemical when you're talking about a fertilizer. It's your N in the NPK fertilizer. So nitrogen makes things grow, and sediment makes the dirt. It's what's flowing through the water. So those are the two things that when you have an overabundance of them, it covers up the other bigger plants that can't move away, and then it causes the filamentous and the planktonic to explode in growth. Unfortunately, the planktonic is usually a little bit more aggressive than the filamentous. So if you don't address it at all, you can end up with a pond of just plankton, basically. And you just have this green sludge. Now, the ponds use those three types of algae to do different important things. And when they're out of balance, it's very difficult to get them back into it. Also, because heat and lack of oxygen affect the algae balance as well. And our summers are much hotter. Our summer nights are much hotter. We don't cool off in the evening as we used to. And so you have a very sustained, rich environment where this sort of problem is easy to happen. So when all of that comes together and happens, the pond becomes what's called turbid. It is no longer an ecosystem that has oxygen. It is so polluted that everything inside of it starts to die. You'll see a lot of wildlife die off. And once the pond gets to that state, it's very, very difficult to get it back to a good place. It's that ounce of prevention is equal to a pound of the cure. So that's why handling it now when we're not at that point is really important. So that's part of the pond management plan, is to get that algae under control. So how do we do that? We add bubbles, which is easy. So we have bubbles in the water, which is nice. We have aerators. We don't get to enjoy the bubbles very much because they're actually pointed down. There are other things that we could do to enjoy the water and add more bubbles, like a fountain. I know that is something that's very popular. Unfortunately, fountains don't actually add a lot of oxygen to the water. They're more for us and the sound, and it adds to the ecosystem, but it's not adding oxygen to the water the way you think it would. And one of the issues with fountains is our pond's only 8 feet deep at the most. So if we have a drought, the fountain can't function, and then we need to address that problem. So the downsides of a fountain don't outweigh the plus sides if you're trying to add more oxygen into a space. Plants add a lot of oxygen to a space. They have to be kept well, and they have to be the right species, but using plantings to filter and to help keep a space stable is really a good way to do that. And here's a picture of our aerators bubbling away. We currently have 5 aerators, only 4 of them are functioning. You won't see them work in the morning or at night because they're solar powered. But in the afternoon when the sun's overhead, you will see little bubbles coming up. They're really headed down. So it's pumping all that oxygen down to the bottom of the pond where it needs to be. So speaking of plants, my favorite thing, plants provide for an ecosystem. They're not just the ecosystem, they are providing for it as well. So when we're talking about plants, we want to know our roots. We want to do erosion control, thinking about where we want to plant these things. We want to trap that carbon. We want to stop the soil from moving around. We also want to think in layers. We want to see the whole forest, but we want to see the trees too. So there's different types of plantings and different layers of distance away from the pond that we'll talk a little bit about. Riparian buffers are a very popular topic right now, if you're a plant nerd. And then you want to support local plants and choose things that are indigenous to the area. 1, because they support the wildlife more, and 2, they're less maintenance most time. So you have to be careful about the plants that you select. Some species will grow very aggressively. They all have different growth rates and longevity. So when we're picking our plants, we take all of that into account. So we want to know our roots, think in those layers, and we're going to try to pick as locally as we can. So when we're talking about picking those plants, the right plant, right place, I know my gardeners know that. So the first place we'll talk about is the riparian buffer, and that's As we zoom out, that's our forest, that's our tree line. Those are our shrubs, our woody plants, our long-term, long-lived part of our ecosystem. They're a part of our community. The next part is the littoral shelf. It's that vegetated slope. So it's going to be our friends that come and go, our perennials, our annuals, and maybe some smaller shrubs and things like that. The third place we can put plants is something that we're considering is a newer idea called a floating wetland. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. So that's kind of a fun idea. So this is our riparian buffer. You can see the big tall trees, lots of leaves. It's creating lots of shade and it's holding onto that side. Littoral shelf, that's your pond edge planting. It's what you see when you drive by. It's not your riparian, but it's in the water. And then you've got floating wetlands. Here's an example of one being constructed in Florida, because they use a lot of floating wetlands down there and in Baltimore, and any place that has a lot of coastal erosion, they've been really helpful. So the riparian buffer, this is kind of where what it looks like. You've got your different sizes of trees and shrubs leading to your water. They connect different spaces together. For us, it provides, we don't have to see the road. It connects the different areas. It connects us to Deep Run Park. It connects our whole campus together. It makes us feel enclosed and in a sense of place, like we're all in an area together. And that means that wildlife doesn't have to run across a road or fight through a parking lot or things like that as they travel from habitat to habitat. And that also means that the water doesn't need to go through those other hard surfaces as it travels. So it's being absorbed into the soil that hasn't been disturbed. The soil is usually more healthy and able to absorb a lot more of that water because it's not compacted from development. It's also sequestering that carbon, which really helps prevent the heat of greenhouse gases. So carbon itself is not a greenhouse gas, but it is a major component of CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. So by managing that, we help decrease the heat level. And then again, it's helpful for the water quality. All of those roots are filtering that water and catching little particles and stopping trash and just creating a barrier each time so that the water has to pass through something. And that's filtering and removing things that we don't want to stick around. This is the littoral zone, just an image I want to show you. It's about all the colorful part is where we're talking about, that sloped area. You can see it goes right down into the water. And there are some plants listed there. Elderberry is a great one for that. Elderberry syrup, anybody? But that's a great bird-supporting plant. It's a native plant. We've got Virginia sweetspire, switchgrass, some swamp sunflowers. All of those are native to our area and provide successional flowering, so you have something happening at each season. So when you're planting that area, you want it to be very dense and full of lots of perennials and lots of growth, because if you have a bare spot, something else is going to pop up in there and you may not want it there. The floating wetlands, this is an example of what they look like. So you've got a little mat floating on the water where the roots of the plants are dripping down into it, and they're creating what's something called a biofilm. And so it's like a film that stays on the roots. And fish live underneath of it, and they eat bugs, and they eat little bacteria, and algae can grow under there. But it's also adding a lot of oxygen. It's processing that nitrogen. It's utilizing any other chemicals in that area that help the plants grow. And it's also shading out some of that area and cooling underneath of it. So it prevents a lot of heat from gathering in one place. So there's different types of materials that you can use to construct them. This is just a general example, but they can be viable spaces for wildlife to live and for beautiful flowers to grow. So when we're choosing our plants, we want to pick them from our Virginia, at least. We try to be closer to Cedarfield. I won't get into that, but we're going to choose from Virginia at least. We want to pick plants that have seasonal interest year-round, that give us something even in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, and the winter. So even if it's not one plant doing all four things, it's maybe a group of 10 plants doing all four things. So it's always enjoyable to look at. The ground is always covered, and we're always functional even in the winter time when those perennials and those annuals are not there. We also want plants that can rise and fall with different water levels and handle inundation of water and drought. A lack of water is actually very similar to being totally flooded with water. It's about the availability of oxygen to the plant. So we want to choose species that are very flexible, and some of them will rise and fall even as the water level changes. We also want to pick different sizes of plants while we're planting. So trees, seeds, little plants, big plants. As we go through the development of the plan, we'll choose sizes and types of plant material that work well together at different times of the year. So in the winter time, it might be more appropriate to do seeding, but in the spring and summer and fall, we can plant small plants called landscaping plugs. And then in the wintertime, we can plant things called tree whips. So I'll show you what those look like. And they save us a lot of not only energy planting them, you don't have to dig a big hole, but it saves us time and money. So these are some of the plants that, when we look at a plant list of things that could go into it, these are things that were recommended by solitude management and generally by pond building people overall, and are native specifically to our area, so they're going to support our birds and our fish and our turtles and things like that, not things that aren't already here. So one of the ones that I love, and this is one that Frank brought up, was the marsh marigold, Caltha palustris. It's an early spring riser, so it comes up, it's bright, it's sunny. It looks like an invasive plant we have on the campus as well, but this marsh marigold is beautiful. It flowers for a long time, very early in the year. And then after following that in the springtime as well, you have the blue flag irises. Irises are not often thought of as something that's, doing a lot of work for you, but the flag irises really do. We want to avoid the yellow flag iris because it's very invasive and it's not actually doing anything for our wildlife, but the blue ones are very beneficial and flower fairly early in the year. Red cardinal flower, there is one blooming in the shade garden right now that is just beautiful, but gorgeous, striking plant, tall spikes of bright scarlet flowers. There's also a blue variety that does a little better in some shade. Great for butterflies, but it also attracts a lot of hummingbirds. These are all plants you can also use in a garden setting, so they're not very aggressive. They're easily managed, and they're appropriate for the space. This is a plant called blazing star, and the Liatris family, huge butterfly magnet. Butterflies just love this plant. And each of the little purple tassels is its own individual flower. So there's a lot of nectar in those. It turns into a tiny little bulb over the winter time, and so it handles being knocked around in the soil, flooding, whatever. It does not mind. It'll come back. Joe Pye weed is a really close to my heart plant. It's a beautiful one. Again, it has lots of those small flowers. This one gets fairly tall, so we can put it at the back of the design so that we can get lots of butterflies as we drive by the road, looking at that. And then later on in the fall, you'll have all of our native sunflowers that bloom. So the Helianthus genus is the smaller sunflowers, but goldfinches love them, and so do many other small songbirds. So these are just a few plants that give you kind of an idea of the perennials that we would be using in that space that would be giving us that flowering color. Now, when we're talking about roots and stabilizing, grasses are really something that cannot be beat. Grasses, rushes, and sedges are a good portion of the design most of the time. They're going to be significantly more than the perennial species. This is a rush. The saying goes, sedges have edges. Oh no, I'm not going to do it, I can't remember it. But sedges and rushes and grasses all have slightly different forms, but their roots all grow in the same way. They create fibrous mats of roots. So here we have a soft rush is going to be the one on the far left over there. So that's going to be a nice round plant. It's going to stay over the winter time. The center one is called river oats or sea oats. It's a little different looking. I have a close-up on the dangling seed heads you can see here. They have a lot of movement to them, and they turn a coppery orange color over the winter time. They're very pretty. They just kind of wave, like very bamboo looking, but not as aggressive or tall as bamboo. And the third one is switchgrass, and that's a great butterfly plant for them to lay their eggs on and to put their cocoons down. So they feel very safe in that because it's very dense. It's also very aggressive and will fill in places before weeds can. The sea oats will reseed, and then the juncus can handle being completely flooded. So we're creating this big fibrous mat of roots. Grass roots are very different from other plants. They are much smaller, they're little more filaments, and they're regenerative. So if a chunk of it goes flying away, it doesn't care. It just keeps coming back. It doesn't have a tap root like a lot of other plants do, and if that tap root, that main root gets broken, that plant will die off. So we don't want to use those in areas where the water is changing and flowing in a lot of different ways. But these grasses are going to hold everything together for us, even if we lose some of those other perennial or tap-rooted plants. The last place is the standing water. What can go in that? And shrubs actually do pretty well. We already have a lot of this plant. It's called buttonbush. It's one of my favorites. They make these like, I don't know, fiber optic looking white flowers and then have red seed capsules that hang out over the winter. This is one of the best plants for bird support, and it can handle standing water all the time or not. I've used it in dry garden settings, and it's fine. So it's a great, very versatile plant. It gives good fall color. We have a lot of these around the campus, but they're cultivated varieties. The true swamp rose mallow is a really good plant for that type of area. Big, beautiful flowers. You see them coming into Cedarfield, driving around. We see different varieties. So that is a great plant to use in that kind of environment as well. And sometimes bumblebees will fall asleep in them, and it's really cute. So. And then winterberry hollies are a great example of deciduous winter interest. So the bush is not very exciting during the summertime. You do need male and female ones, so we'll have to put a few different ones around the campus. But all winter long, they'll hang on to these beautiful red berries. They're really quite striking. There is a winterberry holly currently in the shade garden that's very beautiful over the winter. So having those bright red berries for us to look at rather than looking at the bare soil is a nice touch for the winter time. And the birds really love it. So speaking of fall, there's a lot of migrations happening in the fall, and certain plants that we can use will help with that. Milkweed is one that everybody, for the monarchs, we want to support that, so we can use swamp milkweed, which is a great plant that handles the same conditions we've been talking about. Asters are another one that's frequently brought up. Beautiful. This is a New England aster, so it's often a bushy form. It's very purple, sometimes pink. They're, again, lots of small flowers, lots of nectar. You're fueling up the butterflies and the bees before they hibernate, before they leave on their next leg of the journey, or they go dormant. And the last one, and the most controversial, is goldenrod. And goldenrod, yeah, I saw that. No, so technically, goldenrod does not make us sneeze. Most people, when they have an allergy that is active at the same time that goldenrod is in bloom, they're actually reacting to ragweed, which is blooming below the goldenrod, and we can't see it. The pollen of goldenrod is physically too heavy to ride on the wind. It has to be carried by an insect. So it can't reach our noses unless you've got a bumblebee climbing up your nose, which you have bigger problems then. But goldenrod has many different forms. It's a great plant. It's also very beautiful, can be used as a cut flower. So we can get many different functions out of these plants, but they're still really important. They're what's called a keystone plant. If these plants are not present in an ecosystem, the ecosystem tends to really suffer and can completely collapse. So we want to make sure when we're choosing our plants, we're not only talking about all of the functions we listed, but we're picking plants that are very essential for the things that we want to see. When we're planting, like I said, we want to choose different sizes because, I mean, it's much nicer to plant a little tree than a giant 30-foot tree, and it saves us a lot of money. So the first thing we want to try to do is seeding. Broadcast seeding, what they're doing here, taking big handfuls of seed and throwing them out. It's typically done over the late winter, early spring, usually after a snow, so that all the little seeds can sink in. You mix it together with sand and other aggregates that help hide it from the birds and keep it in place. And that's something that we can get from many different areas where they already have pre-mixes that are chosen for us specifically. They're native to our area. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of things. So broadcast seeding is something that we would do first. In the warm growing season, we would use what's called a landscaping plug. Now these are smaller plants. They tend to be about 4 to 5 inches deep, and they're baby starts. They're fully developed and ready to go, but they're not pot bound as much as what can happen in larger plants. So roots go around and around and around. They get stuck in that container. They tend to grow less well. They tend to grow a little more stunted. These that you are here are 3 different varieties of native plants that actually I grew. That's my hand in there. So that's wild strawberry, green and golds, and a ridgeron, which is a type of, they're all ground covers. So these are things that we would plant in large groups of plants, 25, 30, 200 at a time. So we can get these all in a group of plants as a tray rather than buying individual pots. 1 gallons are very expensive, so that saves us a lot of money and we get a good variety. Also, that means if we lose a plant or two, it's not quite as bad. These are what are called tree whips. These are barely rooted cuttings from different trees and shrubs that you can plant in the wet season. You kind of bury them pretty deeply into the soil, and they will create hedges and groups of trees. They're great for starting riparian buffers. So these are 3 different forms that we could use to do any of these projects that we're working on and to get any of the plants that I mentioned before. So this is what, I just wanted to give you an example of the type of change that happens from year to year when you're choosing these things. This is a floating wetland. And the first year, you have a lot of your milkweeds coming up, some of the irises, things. Faster growing plants are gonna pop up first. And in the second year, you can see there's a lot more purple, red, there's a hibiscus poking up back there. Those are plants that take several years to establish and really start showing off. So you'll see a lot of change over the years and in the seasons as well. So this is summertime for both of them. This is the same year, but very different plants are coming up and being seen. So what does the future hold for the pond? So lots and lots of possibilities, and this is the fun part. This is the part where, as an active community, we're really lucky that we have so much engagement, and the pond should be part of that. So what can we do to add things to the pond that make it more enjoyable for all of us and our families? Stocking it with fish would be great. We've done it before, but making it more of a fun fishing environment. You can fish there now, but you might wait a while to catch one. Clearing a lot of space, making it seating areas and different areas for people to gather while they're fishing. Things like that, just making the space functional. Bird watching is always fun, but as we bring in more of these types of plants and have a more diverse and rich ecosystem, we'll see more different kinds of birds and different types of butterflies, and throughout the year you'll have more opportunity for our photographers in here. And we also have talked about adding signage. So when you're walking around the trails, things like that, having informational signs there that really tell you what's going on, that help you identify the plants, that say, this is why Cedar Field did this and is this way, and we like it. Or we don't, So these are all different opportunities that we have with this space, not only to make it a functional space to get, remove that sediment, to get the algae under control, to tame the vegetation. We can do all of those things and handle all the problems that we see, but we can also add a lot to the space while doing those things. So it's just something I wanted to share, that we have a lot of opportunity there. So thank you all for joining me today. We're going to do a Q&A time to answer any questions. Now, just so you know, I do not have any dates of any projects starting, anything like that, but I'll do my best to answer questions, but things are in the works. So does anybody have a question? Yes, George. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So does the forebay catch everything? So we have to do this area. We're going to be doing this dredging. So we're going to take our time to do that. Are we going to have to keep doing it? Is it going to get into the pond? Yes. Every 5 to 10 years, you're going to need to dredge the forebay, but it's not going to catch everything, especially if we have any 50 or 100-year storm events where a lot of water is entering the system at one time. It doesn't stop there. It just goes floop, floop, floop. And anytime you have wind, a serious wind, it kicks up sediment way down below the water. So that's part of the issue, and that floating wetlands can help stop, is it breaks that wind. When it does become too full, we will need to go in and remove parts of the rest of the pond, but that's where the spillway and the overflow helps out. So as long as that overflow vent doesn't get covered, and we keep it clean, typically you don't have to do extensive dredging on the other part of the pond if it's functioning correctly. So, any other questions? Yes.
I heard your comments about the fountain and some of the challenges you might have, but I was curious if your working group had considered the aesthetic value of a fountain, especially in the evening hours after dark, especially if the fountain were to be lit, because in the evening you can't see flowers and shrubs and trees. And also whether or not the Cedar Field Marketing Department perhaps was given a chance to weigh in, and or the Cedar Field Fresh Eyes Committee given a chance to weigh in.
Yeah, I think, like I said, this should be a collaborative process, and over time, it's not saying that we're no fountain, and we've definitely considered the aesthetic value of that, especially at night. It's just a matter of, is it practical? Is it going to do what we want it to do? And are we going to be walking into any future potential problems? if we're using it as a solution to the algae problem, it's not going to necessarily get us where we want to go. But if we want something pretty and we want to light it up, that's a great use for a fountain. So the fountain is more of a functional comment, not an aesthetic comment. They're very beautiful, especially if you can uplight it in a way that's, really adds to the ecosystem, especially closer to the clubhouse. There are some concerns about the sound of the water being disruptive, but I personally think it would be a great sound to have added to the ecosystem rather than leaf blowers or traffic. So, so yes, I agree that we should consider that with other people's input as well. So, any other questions?
What impact do you anticipate with the expansion of Three Chopped Road?
That is a great question. So the expansion of Three Chopped Road is going to affect our front landscaping more than our pond landscaping. Because of the way that they're widening the road, they're actually going to be putting a detention basin at the front of the property, as far as the plans that I've seen. So the detention basin doesn't have standing water in it. It's just basically a grassy hole in the ground. So that is where we'll focus on beautifying efforts and things like that, but it should not impact the pond itself and any projects that we're talking about today. Yes.
Wait a minute, I've got it. It's not on.
Yeah, thank you, Katrin, for the
It
microphone.
on. I want to know if the plants that you're proposing are deer resistant. We
Ooh.
do have deer at
Yes.
Cedarfield.
Yes, we do. So yeah, a lot of the plants that I'm proposing are deer resistant, especially grasses. Deer tend to avoid plants that are either have a scented sap or a toxic sap. So the milkweeds and a lot of the other plants that I mentioned don't taste good. They have a component in them that is toxic to them, or they don't have a good texture. They really just like the texture of grasses and the texture of ferns, which I did not include any ferns in there, but I would like to. Yes, deer resistance is a huge focus. So, and most of the plants that we've listed, if they aren't deer resistant, once they're established, they can come back from being browsed by deer. So like the button bush or the hibiscus or things like that. They're so deeply taprooted that they tend to bounce back once they're there. If they get the babies, then you can't do that. But yeah, deer resistance is a huge consideration for this as well. Thank you. I should have mentioned that.
What is the time frame for getting work done on the pond that's existing?
Yes. So the 4-bay dredging is the first next step, and that should be happening fairly soon. It has been approved. We're waiting for a schedule. Part of the issue is when you're doing large-scale jobs like this is there's very few companies that are actually certified to do the work and can handle it well. So getting onto their timeline can be a little tricky, but we're in conversation with Solitude Management, who originally did this design, and they were in the process of booking it. That's something that's done through the maintenance and engineering department through James Hicks, the director. So I'm not usually privy to that, but he is in the works with that. So hopefully within the next month or two, we'll start to see significant change. Planting would ideally be later on this year. Now, the other projects, might be a series of different times of the year, throughout the next few years. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What are the chances of having a track wood path built around the pond so you have
So doing more paving. So that's something that I know that is in consideration for accessibility, especially. When you add more impervious pavement surfaces around a best management practice like that, you end up with more sheet flow from different directions that isn't going in the piping. So that can be an issue with that. So it just would have to be something to consider. It has been talked about. I have not heard anything else about it. But if that's something that you would like to see happen, I encourage you to reach out to James Hicks, the director of maintenance, and send him a note saying, hey, this is something I'd like to see considered at the next environmental committee meeting. Yes. Yes, there is. There is a paved path that goes from the tennis court to the overlook dock. It's a little bit bumpy, but that area is paved. I think maybe talking more about the trails and things like that that go around the pond. Working on repairing the bridges and re-leveling the pathways is something that is already on maintenance list to do, and just keeping them clean, making sure they're power washed regularly so that they're not getting mossy and things like that. Anyone else? Don't be afraid. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Appreciate you taking your time.